Pirate Kings, Pirate Queens, non-binary monarchs of the sea. How's it going? What's going on? We are officially in Set 4. And since release, we've had a couple pretty big tournaments. On September 23rd and 24th, we had the PPG Knoxville Regionals. And then on September 30th, we had the Oceania, Australia, however you want to refer to the whole regional, organized by TAK Games. And we also had a regional in Latin America, I believe Mexico, but don't quote me on that. The reason I can't be quoted on that one is because I don't have much data for it. But for those first two, I got the gold mine. I got like the city of Shandora of tournament data from PPG and TAK. So huge thank you to those. Super helpful in giving me a lot of good information that's helped me come to some pretty interesting conclusions for this video. Now, I am doing this a little differently. Normally, I script my videos out for the most part. This time, I've mainly got some notes, some key points. I'm also recording visually instead of just audio, so you might see a fair amount of messy cut here and there. So I apologize for those. Hopefully, they're not too numerous. This video is going to be a bit different than my Japanese meta-analysis videos, because this one isn't going to be so much about winning deck lists or topping deck lists even. I'm sure a lot of you have seen those already, or what goes into an average performing deck for a certain leader, but more so about the tournament as a whole. Overall meta shares and the conclusions that we can extrapolate from that about a leader's overall performance and their matchups. Also, huge thank you to everyone who has supported that Set 4 video. Again, not a ton in the grand scheme of things. I know I'm still pretty low on the One Piece card game YouTuber totem pole, but 500 subscribers is a milestone to get to that. I'm really glad that one could get me to 10K views on the video. Thank you to everyone who watched it, even if you were just screenshotting the deck lists. I was hoping that would do half as well as the Set 1 video, so seeing that one be the most viewed video on the channel so far, by far, is doing a lot to motivate me to try and put content out more consistently. So thank you again for that. I can't believe it, but I guess it helps to be somewhat on time when I'm talking about a set that's going to come out. Good to know. Let's talk about this data itself. What exactly did I get from PPG and TAK to make this video? What I asked for was a list of all the players in the tournament and what leader they used. Just the leader, not the deck list. One, because that's not relevant to the conclusions I'm trying to draw at the moment. And two, it might be a lot to ask them to gather that, especially if the players didn't consent to having their deck lists shared at first. But there's still so much that we can do with this data. Now, as a bonus, it turns out that TAK actually made deck lists public for their tournament afterward on BCP. So I'm going to leave a link to the bracket in there that you can peruse, take a look at. There are some pretty cool lists in there. There is one that I might try and play around with, make some content of, but I want to get some games in before I do that. And also not overextend myself or overcommit myself to too many projects, because, I've never done that before, right? But with just the information that's publicly available on BCP, as well as noting which leaders were played by which players, we can figure out meta shares, matchup spreads, and overall leader performance from these tournaments. So let's get into it. Let's start things off with PPG. There were 651 players at this regional, and of those 651, I was able to find the leader info for 617 of them. And this paints a pretty good picture. What we see right here is the meta for Knoxville. And the first thing that pops out to me is the fact that Katakuri has the biggest slice of the pie by far. He is at 21.5%, whereas the next most popular, Newgate and Grurple Dofi, are at around 14% each. So there are 1.5 times as many Katakuri players as there were either Newgate or Grurple Dofi players. And for me personally, that was a huge shock. I had heard a lot of hype for Katakuri, I had seen a lot of videos being posted, I'd seen that he had done well in Japan. I know that Sanji's a great card, Beige is an amazing card with a busted trigger, Amande is even a decent 2k counter, and those vanillas just give it so much more pressure, but I didn't think it would be the pick for everyone. I wasn't sure if maybe those cards gave a better Newgate matchup. I had been distracted by the new decks and my boy Blue Croc over there, but this was pretty novel and not what I expected. But what I wasn't as surprised by was the fact that these are the decks we see here with 5% or more of the meta, and with the very welcome addition of mono, blue, Croc. I know some people were commenting on the set 4 video saying, hey, why is Croc not higher? Why is Croc not higher? He should be rated higher. Red Rock is so good. I'm with you. I'm with... There is no one who has been more excited for these blue cards to go in blue Croc than me. But that was just the data. And I think I figured out why we have this big change here. And this is something that I meant to mention in the set 4 video, but I just forgot to, and that is the restriction list. If we look at how things went in set 3 for us, one of the biggest changes after the restriction was the rise of Blue Dofi to counter Newgate, as well as the fact that we did get a couple of those topping Crocodile lists with the Impel Croc. And I think that the restrictions, at least in set 3, had this general trend of making blue better and weakening yellow because of the playstyle shift that Newgate took, which also fed into my sheer surprise at how popular Katakuri was. But, you know, maybe the matchup's just better. Maybe Katakuri stands a chance. Maybe Newgate is still dead with the restrictions. Or, well, you know, not dead because he was the second most played deck. But maybe there was a significant enough hit for things to change and to give Katakuri that chance to shine in the spotlight. And those of us who have looked at the top 32 bracket for Knoxville will realize that what we see here for the overall meta spread, like a lot of tournaments, is a bit different than what ended up topping. Here we can see the top 32 for Knoxville. First things first, Zoro won. The only Zoro in Top Cut managed to take the whole thing home, so congratulations where congratulations are due. And as far as how well the different leaders did, there were 12 Newgates, 6 Law, 3 each of Katakuri, Blue Croc, and Rebecca, 2 Gribble Dofi, then 1 each of that Zoro who won, 1 Queen, and 1 Black Luffy, which is also crazy. I haven't had a chance to look at the list very much. It's definitely something I want to try out. Good for them. Good stuff. I think Orlando. Good job. Now, the way that I've chosen to represent this data is undoubtedly going to be a bit different than how we're used to seeing top cuts represented. Not the usual pie chart, and this may be a bit strange to look at first, but I do have a pretty good reason for it, and I think that reason is going to become more apparent as this video goes on. But regardless of the way that this chart is formatted, it's pretty plain to see that once Swiss was said and done, Newgate had taken the glory. 12 spots, again, twice as many as Law there. And, you know, we're used to that. It's not my favorite thing in the world, but I can live with it. I don't know if it's just because I have Stockholm Syndrome after seeing it so many times, but at this point, if Newgate's taking less than half of the top spots, Sure. I mean, let's see, Newgate and Law together took 18, so that's just over half. You know, not my favorite. Y'all know my feelings on Law being the top deck. That's fine if that were happening, but again, this is doable. I do think that the amount of spots a deck got in Top Cut tells a decent story, but as far as measuring a deck's overall achievement, I think that the measurement could be a bit better. There was only 1 Zoro in top 32, but it was the one that won. But at the same time, there were still more Newgates than Zoro, so that should count for something as well. So what we need is a way to find a balance between a deck's overall placement and its prevalence in the top cut. And Pokemon has figured that out. Instead of giving players invites to prestigious tournaments just based on whether or not they get top 16 or top 32 at a regional, treasure cup, what have you, Pokemon has a whole point system that they award players for various placements at tournaments of various sizes. And I think this is something that's pretty easily adaptable to One Piece. This is the point system that I've been using in my analysis videos, specifically the Set 4 one, and I think it's done a lot to try and clear up the greater picture of how players, leaders, different strategies are progressing throughout a given format. Pokemon may not be the only system that strikes this balance in order to answer the question I'm posing. I'm just using it because it's the one that I actually know. Pokemon's the game that I've played the most aside from One Piece. So if there is another system that would answer this question, let me know in the comments. It's something I would love to learn about. It's just not something that I can really comment on here because I'm not as informed. A One Piece regional is unsurprisingly, pretty equivalent to a Pokemon regional in terms of its size, its scale, and its general level of competition. So we can take these point values for 1st, 2nd, 4th, 8th, 16th, 32nd, and apply them to what we have here in top 32. And once we apply those point values to Knoxville, it shakes things up a bit. It tells a similar story, but it gives us a bit more specificity when we try and balance those two metrics of placement and performance. Now, if your main focus is what topped at a tournament, this is great. But to me, a tournament isn't just top 32. There's a bigger story to be told for a deck's overall performance. And we have more data than just top 32. Coming back to the scale that Pokemon has, an event of a similar size, between 400 and 800, would actually give out points to anyone in the top 128. And similarly, at a One Piece regional, top 28 gets some prizing at the very least, so why not expand this system to the top 128 of Knoxville? And this gives us another new perspective. The biggest change here is going to be for Katakuri. As we looked at the overall meta, by far the most popular deck, going into top 32, whether it's shares or the amount of points, he then started lacking. And now we see that Katakuri is second only to Newgate as far as points go in top 128. And this lines up a bit more with what I was thinking for it. You know, it's still a very good deck, but it turns out that, spoilers, the Newgate matchup still sucks. So throughout a tournament, if you are able to, play the fundamentals well, have some good draws, and, more or less, or I guess more games than you don't, you'll get pretty deep into the tournament. But then once you get to that, range of, you're in the top 64, you're going to start running into all of these decks that are proven to not only do well, but also proven to kind of rock Katakuri over the edge. And so that's why you're not going to see as many of them in Top Cut. But still a deck that can get you pretty far in the tournament, and that's something that I don't think should be overlooked. And to me, this is a great balance of population and performance. But we could do better. The amount of points a deck gets is going to be a great measure of performance, but to some degree, a more popular deck is gonna end up getting more points just by virtue of it being played more. Not in every case, our Katakuri would have the most points, but it's at least gonna have a factor. It's at least gonna inform this, right? So how do we work that in? And on top of that, there's this whole chicken and the egg thing of, okay, is a deck popular because it does well? Or in this case, is a deck getting points because it's popular? Are you Edward Newgate because you're the strongest, or are you the strongest because you're Edward Newgate? That's One Piece, right? I don't know anime. And we can take this into account by taking those scores that each leader has and then dividing it by the number of players using that leader. And we get a great metric that I've named PPP, points per player. And that's basically just, think of it like a top 8 conversion rate in other games, except just with a wider scope, since we're trying to look at the entire tournament. Now, immediately it seems there's a big red flag here, or a black flag, because we have Black Luffy way above the rest. But that's just an outlier. Every measure is going to have outliers at some point, and this is just the big one that we have here. We're not going to consider him as we're looking at this metric, because he is more so an exception. A great one, commendable one, again, lots of props to Orlando, but doesn't fit when we're trying to look at the tournament in whole in this context. And as far as that balance that I've been mentioning goes, I think that this is a perfectly suitable metric to say, make a tier list, something to that degree. But, says the insane data man, we don't just have top 128. We have more than 600 lists. We can go even further. Since we have almost all of the leaders and their placements for the entire tournament, we can look at each leader's performance on a macro level, as wide of a lens as we possibly want to go. For example, we had 39 Blue Croc players in the tournament, and of those 39, 3 of them made a top 32. And they're undoubtedly going to be some amount ahead of the other 36. but just how far? How much better did those decks in top 32 do than the average Crocodile player? What even is the average player if we want to ask ourselves if that just means the one medium player or what a reasonable range of expectation, records, and placements that could be considered an average record for someone playing Blue Croc. Higher than what I'm gonna get probably, but you know, I don't play this game. I just look at numbers. And then for those players who are either in the average camp or the below average camp or the above average camp but not quite in top cut, how far away are those players from each other? Now, to cut down on the rambling that basically amounts to a high school stats class taught by a crazy person, what we can do is we can take the placement for every single leader, every placing for all the Newgate players, all the Law players, all the Katakuri players, all the Croc players, take the minimum, the maximum, the medium, and the first and third quartiles. I won't bore you by talking about what those are. Then we could make the greatest graph I've ever made for the One Piece card game. We got box plots, baby. Let's go. So what are we looking at here? What I've done is I have arranged all the leaders that were used in this tournament according to their median placement. So if you were to arrange all the different placements in a straight line and pick the one that is in like the geographical middle of those, that is the dotted line on that character's picture, and that's how they are arranged. Best finishes on the left, worst finishes on the right, and you can see what those placements are on that y-axis going up and down. I've also split up the area of the chart according to the match record that each got. 09, 1-8, 2-7, yada yada yada, all the way up to 8-1. The only 9-0 is at the top. This is just looking at Swiss because that was when all of these decks were being played throughout the entire tournament. And then top 32, that's its own animal. The box itself is representing the middle 50% of the players of that deck. So if we look at Newgate from the top of the box to the dotted line, that's the 25th to 50th percentiles. Other part of the box is the 50th to 75th percentiles. Then the two tails are the lowest ranking player to the 25th percentile, and then the top line, that other whisker, is the 75th percentile to the best finish of the tournament. And this tells us some pretty neat information. Immediately, you can compare these decks to each other and say that, okay, the median Crocodile player finished better than the median Zoro player, so I'll let you make your own conclusions on what that means for the deck's viability. But more importantly, this tells us that, for example, that middle ground, that middle 50% of Law players had much more variability than those Croc players. Their finishes were much less predictable, and that's going to speak a lot to the skill expression inherent in playing Law. And, most people who've been playing One Piece for a little while are going to know how hard a deck Law is, but that example sort of paints what the size of these bars can tell us. Different players are going to want different things, so whether or not a bar has more area on the graph or less isn't necessarily going to be good or bad, but it might give you an idea of what you're looking for in a deck. Some people might want a deck that doesn't place as high on average, but is more reliable in its placings as sort of barometer for how you're doing. Other people want that deck that is like Law, much harder to play, a range of different places you can go, high really like Katakuri, or a nice balance. For example, that Yamato, that's looking like a pretty nice plot. That's looking relatively consistent for the 5 players that played him. That is a small sample size, but all 5 of those placements were around or better than top 264. So for a deck that's as little known as that with that few players, that bodes decently. Or at the very least, it could be something that's worth trying. Now, I've also cleaned this up a bit, taken out those decks that have less than 5 players and didn't make it into top 128. When you look at the entire spread of a tournament like this, there are a lot of nuances in a presentation of that data that, I haven't even fully been able to explore myself, because I've basically gone straight from acquiring this data, sorting it, prepping it, making graphs of it, to writing notes about it, and then recording this, or at least as straight to those things as I possibly can. So hopefully this is a helpful tool for you. I find it pretty useful, and as I make more of these videos, I'll probably be able to speak a bit more to what these bars represent, because this is actually my first time representing the data in this way as well. So we're all learning here. And I want to emphasize that I don't think this is just a metric for how well a deck is doing, or rather the strength of a deck. I think it is just as useful to be a measure of skill expression, the skill floor and the skill ceiling of a deck, in a way that a lot of other representations don't seem to be, in my opinion. And on that topic, I just want to highlight that those areas where we see 7-2, 8-1, the usual indicators of top cut. And 7-2 isn't even a reliable measure of top cut once you get to those 1,000-player tournaments. That area is so small compared to the rest of the graph. I just want to bring that up because in a lot of interactions that I have had, I've seen a lot of people beat themselves up for not being in that area of the graph consistently or occasionally. And I think it's really good to aim high, but I also think taking that step back, having that wider perspective can do a lot to help appreciate the wins that you have gotten, as well as where someone can improve, more so than just saying, I'm not in top cut. I need to be in top cut. I'm gonna be in top cut! Bit of a difference there, right? And that's not to invalidate the accomplishments of anyone who has gotten to top cut, especially if they're getting to top cut consistently. Again, that is huge. If anything, I like to think this highlights that even more because, again, that section of the graph is comparatively tiny. Just food for thought. Anyway, back to the data. When I look at this graph, I personally want to use it as a tool to gauge my own progress. See how my piloting of a deck compares to everyone else using that deck. See if it might be something that I'm vibing with, or if there might be another playstyle I might want to try out. Especially as the format goes on, because these positions are not concrete, they're not absolute. These are going to move up and down, expand and contract. I just think it's going to be pretty useful and interesting to see how that shifts and how my own or other players' individual placements within these graphs shift as well. And this makes me really, really hope that I can keep getting the data to use this, because I do really enjoy making graphs like these, especially if they help you out. I also made a version of this graph with those more outlier-y decks, the ones with less than 5 players for them. I'm gonna flash it up on the screen real quick, but it's not something I want to dwell on because it just doesn't seem like it's a good aspect ratio to be YouTube friendly. But if you want to take a look at that, I'll leave a link in the description. But those are the main measures and figures that I want to go over for Knoxville. So now let's take a second and shift it over to Oceania. Oceania had 250 players, and we got the lists for all of them. Again, everything's on BCP, so have fun with that. And Katakuri was still the most played deck by far, by a wider margin than the next most popular deck. But the overall share Katakuri had didn't rise very much. Things were just more diverse in these 250 players. As far as changes though, Newgate's place in the meta shares went down a bit, and Zoro's increased a ton after he got that win in Knoxville. Law and Gurple Dofi were also very decently represented, though Gurple Dofi did take a little bit of a hit. Blue Croc also took a bit of a hit. Rest his soul. I love that man, but I'm still not as sure about him being the right deck for this format at the moment, and not even for the reasons that we might think. But I'll get into that in a little bit. And as we look at the top cut to 16, already converted to points, by the way. This is not just the number of spots within top 16. And we can see that Law just swept more than 30% of those top cut points. Newgate took a hit. Zoro had, once again, a nice increase after that win. We had an ace do well. That's pretty cool. And then, no Blue Croc to be found. And Rebecca also did a little bit better this time too, so that's also pretty cool. And then Katakuri had a better showing as well, going from 10% of those top cut points in Knoxville to 17% of the top cut points in Oceania. And as we expand these points to the entire tournament, which are just for top 64 at a smaller event like this, being only 250 players, we see that Law is still in the top spot there, but then Katakuri ends up getting right underneath it. because, again, that theory I had before about Katakuri doing really well until it runs into those later rounds and those other decks that have been doing really well and hits a wall. Followed by Zoro and Newgate, then Rebecca, which is nice to see her getting a little bit better as time goes on, and then Gribble Dofi, and a couple fun things. We've got Nami, we have Smoker, there was a King. There was a King in top 32, we have that Ace, then we get the cool stuff over there. And then as we take the meta shares into account by going through the points per player metric, we see that Law, once again, took the biggest spot there. A bigger share of the points per player than Newgate did at the top of Knoxville. And then, as far as Law's success itself goes, a lot of that's probably owed to the fact that Law figures out a format as time goes on, and then gets a chance to play around what's being played around it. And also just Katakuri is a great matchup, but Katakuri was also a relatively similar share of the meta, so probably more the former point than the latter there. Newgate, though, is the second best if you're looking at points per player, because Newgate's popularity went down somehow. I don't know, he might have just been overshadowed by Zoro. Maybe people are just sick of playing him. Maybe they just like Katakuri. Maybe it's not a viability thing. It's not where my brain gravitates to. If you think you know why Newgate went down in popularity so much and Katakuri stayed the same after not doing very well, let me know in the comments. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that. And then, we see Rebecca still doing alright, Zoro's hitting up there, and then Katakuri's still relatively low on that points per player measure there. A little bit better than he was for Knoxville, but still not much, and not as much as you would expect to see for a deck that is being played this much at these big tournaments. And here are those lovely, lovely box plots. We've got the one with all the decks there. Peep the blue-purple Kaido. Just keep an eye on that for a second. Just remember Kaido. Remember Kaido? I remember Kaido. I miss Kaido. Anyway, Law, best median finish out of any deck here, which lines up with all these different metrics we've been looking at. Newgate's right behind it. But then we've got a nice jump before we get to Katakuri. And then lots of other conclusions you can make for yourself here. But now I want to direct this to Rebecca. That is a very wide difference between the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile, meaning there was a huge range of finishes that these Rebecca players had. It's an even bigger difference than Law. Both of them are insanely skill-based decks, and the main reason I can see Law's difference being a bit lower is because, again, Law is an established deck, and players who have used it for long enough may have been able to anticipate them after, one tournament, those little shifts that are going to happen. But Rebecca is a new deck. A lot of players are still learning how to use it. Some have really put the time in, as you'll see for those top 25%, but the people who are choosing to play it, they're all over the place. But this made me think about a different way I can arrange these graphs. And that's by not organizing them by the median, but by that third quartile, the 75th percentile. Basically what's just above those lower 3/4 of the tournament and just below that higher quarter. I think that is the place where a deck's success becomes less about, it doesn't stop being about this, it's less about the inherent strength of that deck, of this combination of 50 cards and what it can do, and more about what a player can do with them because of the scale of competition that you are going to be against if you're at that level. And also shows where that shift is for each of these individual decks. And basically, it is the shifting point between those good, decent, maybe above average players to the, okay, this is a player who is extremely skilled and has put a lot of time in with this deck, in my opinion. We'll see how this stacks up with more analysis. But if we look at Rebecca's, we're going to see that 75th percentile point is much, much higher. And that is showing, in my opinion, that these Rebecca players are starting to get more in tune with the deck. Again, the 75th percentile of Rebecca is, well, actually, it's getting pretty close to Law. I'd say that, again, the difference between the 75th percentile and the 25th is still very, very wide for this regional. But it's moving up compared to where it was in Knoxville. Also, here's a graph of Knoxville according to with a third quartile there. Either there for a little bit, feel free to screenshot it, do your thing. Back to Oceania. I'm hoping that I've done a good job of giving a good description of these box plots, because I know that they are a graph that we don't see used in card game discussion very often. Let me know if you have questions about this. I'm more than happy to answer them, or if you have your own interpretations of them, because I'm still, getting a feel for using them for this purpose as well. But I've been talking so much about this data and these graphs and questions to be answered and how we can go about answering them that I haven't even gotten to the main purpose that I had for getting this data on who played what leader in the first place. Matchup rates. Once I had that data on who played what leader, I was able to go into BCP, look at the pairings for every single round of these tournaments, including Top Cut for Knoxville, as well as the side events for Oceania, because God, this helps sate the old OCD, and then do an ungodly amount of reformatting, auto-sorting, and find and replace functions to get this nice little table we have here of how often each deck wins against the other decks. Note about this is that I'm not including the decks I'm only including decks that have a matchup with 10 or more games played. Just because, very, very low sample size. Sample size so low that I can't really trust for sure which direction, positive or negative, it's trending. But once I get to 10, it's not the best. I'm usually shooting for 30 games, but we can at least, get an idea of where that's going and trust what the majority is. I've also got this version right here that I use where I take those matchups with 10 to 30 games in between there, and I weigh them out just to compensate for that relatively smaller sample size. You may have seen tables like these before. If you haven't, I highly suggest you check out Jeff Ruberg, definitely Jeff on Twitter. He makes these as well. These are much prettier than mine because he's able to take the time to do that, and I envy him and congratulate him for doing so. Check out his work. It's amazing. He also has some really good takes on the entire state of the game. Just wanted to shout out someone I admire in this community. So we're going to see that for Katakuri, the Newgate matchup still sucks. I'm still so confused as to why so many people are playing him. Again, not a bad deck, but I think that a lot of these people are trying to get these really high results. I don't think it's the pick unless you are really, 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 really good with the deck. Swinging for 7k is great. Stacking triggers is great. It is not enough inherently in the deck to make up for a not great field, unless you have taken a lot of time to practice going into that unfavorable field. Newgate, still, in these tournaments, he took positive matchups, won more games than he lost against pretty much everything except Queen, and then Queen is still a pretty underrepresented deck, and struggles into a lot of other matchups, so that's not even something Newgate has to worry about. If it's going to take an L, that's a pretty decent L to take. And of course, the way you build the deck, the techs you use, the build you use, whether it's Strawbeard versus the Whitebeard Pirates package, what decks you're trying to counter, are going to affect this. And again, this is only 2 big tournaments. It's not the best sample we could have, but it's an indicator of what's going on for the most part, and it's only going to be a better measure as time goes on. Now bring it to the deck that I really wish was doing better, Blue Croc. I was a bit skeptical about it, specifically because I was worried about its yellow matchup, but in these tournaments, yellow looks pretty even. I haven't had a chance to look at the gameplay of it, but I'm not sure. I feel like the 10-cost Big Mom is still a huge issue, even if you can control their board, but I don't know, it might just be them just staying alive for so long, like the Impel Croc package was able to against Newgate, ironically, in set 3. But that's something I'm going to try and explore a little more. But ironically, in these tournaments, Croc's been struggling into Newgate, which I did not expect, but definitely makes me sad as a mono blue croc lover. But we might just need to check it out. I think Blackbeard TCG's got some pretty cool ideas there to go check his video out. I really like his list, especially if you're going to a field of Zoro and Law, which just seem to be getting more popular, especially Law after the way it did this weekend, and the fact that it still destroys Katakuri. I think that there are some ways you can build it that are going to help into this field, and Blackbeard TCG definitely makes you want to pick the deck up again. But another really cool thing you can do with a table like this is if you have an idea on what the meta is going to be for an event, you can put whatever the shares you think each deck is going to have in. It'll give you a nice expected win rate for each deck, which you get by multiplying the matchup win rate by the expected number of games you're going to play against that deck. You know, for a 9-round regional, if Katakuri is 22% of the meta, you'll expect to play 2-ish games against it, and then, you know, you multiply those 2 games by whatever your matchup percentage is. That's going to give you your expected number of wins. Again, your own skill with the deck, the way you build it, your own testing is going to affect that. But just to give yourself an idea, if you don't want to play the deck you have been playing, want to try something else, want to see, okay, what do I think is, like, you know, for all intents and purposes, strong or weak into this meta, it's pretty useful. Especially for someone like me, who has barely played this format, because all I do is make spreadsheets about it. But that brings us to a new question. How am I supposed to figure out what the meta is going to be? If I don't have my stats, I'm not going to be able to figure it out. Again, I thought Newgate was going to be the most played deck. And this is a question that I'm still trying to answer. I had an idea after Knoxville, and we're going to bring it back to the overall meta share and the points per player. If we look at how much of the meta a deck takes up, for example, Katakuri, who had about 21.5% of the meta at Knoxville, compare that with how well it actually did when you look at the points per player, you can expect that Katakuri is going to take a nice drop. And what I have been doing is trying to average that meta share with the points per player percentage, say that 10 times fast, and that's giving me an expected meta rate for the next tournament. Obviously, that did not happen. I thought that Katakuri was going to go down significantly. I thought Newgate would stay about the same. You know, I figured that Law and Zoro would see significant hikes. Those last 2 did happen, but Newgate took a huge hit downward, and Katakuri just stayed the same. So they switched, and I think everything's entered in right on my spreadsheet. So there could be a bunch of factors. It could just be because it's a different region, but upon hindsight and seeing that Zoro increase, I do think that they were taking Knoxville into account. Could be regional differences, could be the fact that it's still early in a format and Katakuri is a relatively linear deck to play adequately, and he's a fan favorite character. Those are some reasons I've heard, and they make sense to me. I could see if that's why he's the most popular deck. It just doesn't make sense to me that he's so much more popular than the next best deck. We'll see. What am I missing out on? Let me know. I would love to learn. And of course, the meta doesn't just immediately shift from one week to the next in a straight line. These are changes that are going to reverberate at the level of someone's locals, at the level of their individual testing, at store championships, according to content, according to a bunch of different factors. But to me, this seems like the most quantifiable and immediate impact to the meta, so it's something that I'm personally going to be keeping an eye on, especially as, you know, Law gets even more popular, people take it to locals, and those Katakuri players just have to deal with this looking as beautiful, lovely little goateed face. Wonderful. So that's what we got. Those are my figures, my graphs, my tables, my analyses, my rambling for Knoxville and Oceania. So glad that I was able to make this video. It's pretty new for me. In hindsight, this really does feel like a smorgasbord of different attempts to answer the same question and come to similar and marginally different conclusions. But I'm a big believer in looking at things like tournaments and metagames on the macro, the medium, and the micro level all together. And my main hope is that you got something out of these different perspectives on it. If this did help you out, please let me know. I, again, heard a couple of people talk about some good things that happened for them with the Set 4 video. So I would love for a trend like that to keep continuing. I, again, really want the information that I gather to help people do even better in this game. And these are the first big tournaments of Set 4. We've got a lot more coming. I have no doubt that this is going to get shaken up, at least to some degree. From what I saw of Set 4 in Japan, again, that meta was pretty topsy-turvy. A lot of different decks were coming in and out of that most successful position, even if, you know, Newgate still seemed to be the most successful overall, but maybe people are just sick of Newgate. I don't know. We'll find out. But I'm sure there are going to be some shifts here, and I cannot wait to see them happen. If you'd like me to make more of these videos as the format develops, please let me know by giving it a like. If you have thoughts, questions, realizations, arguments, you know, let me know in the comments. If there are any measures that I didn't go over, if there are any graphs or reasons for my thought process that I didn't make apparent for any reason, please let me know too, because that's going to help me improve as a content creator and be more transparent with everyone I'm talking to on here. And if you really want to support my channel's growth and get notified as I make new videos, which, again, hopefully will be more often than it used to be, please subscribe. That would be a huge help, and 500 is a big milestone for me specifically, but I know that this can reach a lot more people. I know that there's more I can do as a content creator, and I would love to do that. So any of those things will be huge. Once again, hope this helps. Best of luck in Set 4. I can't wait to play in some tournaments of my own. Hopefully I'll be able to cover these next couple on them regionals as I plan them and get more data from those as well. Thanks again. Have a great one.